Good morning, church. Here it is, week 3 in the First Thessalonians series. We're going to talk today about the connection story as being the second metric of a healthy church. Rula Darwazi wrote a book, The Power of Connection Stories from the Middle East, and in it she tells the story of a woman named Rana. And Rana is an interesting woman. She lives in a relatively small village, and in that village, she often invites the women of the village to her home. She feeds them tea and snacks, little things that she might make or bake, and she wants to listen to them. She hears all about their day's itinerary. She hears all about their needs, their concerns, what's going on. But the most significant thing that she does is she connects those women with other women, and together they develop these small little micro businesses. And those micro businesses open the door to a different life for those women in that very small village, the Stony Hills outside of Jordan. I want to suggest to you that the First Thessalonian church, the church that's described in those first chapters, reveals a number of metrics. We've shared one already. It's filled with people that have a transformation story. But secondly, it is filled with people that have a significant connection story. And connection story is the second metric of a healthy church. So let me read to you this morning from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 1 to 12, and then we'll unpack it together. It's all about Paul's ministry while he was in Thessalonica. And it says this: "You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know. But with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our heart. You know that we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else. Even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for its children, so we cared for you, because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, that our toil, the hardship, we worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preached the gospel of God to you. You are witnesses, so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." Well, how is it that connection stories can be a metric of a healthy church? Why is it that I would suggest that as we move forward, a part of the way that we will gauge whether or not we're doing well is whether or not our church is filled with transformation stories and also connection stories? Well, let me suggest some ways from Paul's letter on how connection stories are a metric of a healthy church. And first, I want to point out to you that, well, they're a metric of a healthy church, and I think Paul recognized that. He said, right in verse 2, he says this: "You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results." He gauged ministry. He saw his ministry among the Thessalonians as being effective. And right after making that statement, he then goes into a description of what his visit was like. And it's there in that description that we begin to see the significance of connection stories. Here's the first way connection stories are a metric of a healthy church. First, they reflect pure motives. Healthy churches advance the kingdom and they reflect pure motives in doing so. First, they're free from trickery or manipulation. Paul said this in verse 3. He said, "For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you." The programs that the church was doing or is doing need to be not manipulative. We're not trying to sucker people in. We're not trying to, do a bait and switch. We just want people to come into a real relationship with God. I had a friend named Gary Curler. He was one of the early disciplers in my life way back in the 70s. And I remember he took me with him to a church in Brooklyn that was having a set of special meetings. I can't remember if they were just special meetings, revival meetings, what they were. But I know we sat in that church, and at the end of the service, there was an altar call. And this kind of really surprised me. During the altar call, an usher came over and spoke to Gary and urged him to go to the altar and actually said these words to him: "Go ahead and go on up and get the flow going." Basically, Gary, not feeling any movement of the Spirit to go forward, was being urged to do something that, well, I think is a little manipulative. To go forward and pretend like the Spirit of God was moving in his heart. I don't want us to ever be like that. I don't want to strong arm people into the kingdom of God. I don't want to manipulate people into the kingdom. I just want to see people respond to the glory of grace and the wonder of who he is. So, connection stories are a metric of a healthy church because they reflect pure motives. They're free of trickery. And secondly, they're free of people-pleasing, fawning, or syncophatizing. A sycophant is a person who is totally, well, in vernacular terms today, we would call them, they're sucking up, they're brown-nosing. They're constantly trying to place themselves in a position of favor with other people. They'll do whatever it takes to do that. Verse 6, Paul says this: "We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else." And then he says, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. He's basically saying, well, look, we were worthy of people just paying special attention to us because we were apostles. But that's not what we were looking for. We didn't want the praise of people. You see, one of the pure motives of connection stories should be that people are connecting with other people, not because they're trying to please someone, not because they're fawning up to them, not because, well, they're just trying to suck up to them in some way. Instead, they are genuine, real connections. The last way that connection stories can be a metric of a healthy church reflecting pure motives is that they're innocent. Paul says in verse 7, "We weren't like these other things. Instead, we were like young children among you." Some versions say gentle. Well, the innocence of children is what makes them stand out as a shining example to the rest of the world. Well, it's that innocence that Paul says reflected the relationships that we built with other people. I would love, as New Hope continues to move forward, more and more stories are told of how one person connects with another person, not because of manipulation or trickery, not because, well, they're people-pleasing or fawning, but in the innocence of just genuine, powerful relationships built on what God does through us. You see, it is this demonstration of genuine care that is the next aspect of how connection stories are a metric of a healthy church. At the end of verse 7, Paul says this. He says, "Just as a nursing mother cares for children, so we cared for you." Have you ever gone to a fast food restaurant and you order something? I don't know, maybe you order a fish fillet, and fish fillet's got that square piece of fish, and it's supposed to have a little bit of tartar sauce on it. It's got a piece of cheese on it. Imagine that you go to that fast food restaurant, and when you open the box in which your sandwich is in, there, instead of on top of the bread, a it's there on top of the bread, excuse me, is cheese. It's not in the middle. It's not where it's supposed to be. Someone just kind of slapped it in there. And you look at it and you go, gosh, the guy who did this really didn't care. Paul says that when he was there, they cared. You see, at the heart of every healthy church is genuine care. We have one job: to love one another. Genuine care must saturate every program, every service, every initiative. We say that we have values as a church, we have a number of them. One of those is that we will create an atmosphere of love. We will demonstrate genuine care. Paul goes on to describe it this way. He says, they shared their lives with them. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Wow. Genuine, caring relationships, part of the connection stories, part of what indicates a church is healthy. You see, these shared lives, relationships, another value, are indicators that a church is healthy and doing well. Genuine care, which is filled with people who are upright models. Verse 9 says this, Paul talking about what he was like and the care and how he loved them and how they shared their lives, said this, surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil, our hardship. We worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. We have an obligation to one another to be an upright model. We have an obligation to walk and live in such a way that our other people aren't ashamed by the choices we make. Why? Because it's a part of showing genuine care. I mean, if you're in a genuine, caring relationship with someone else, you don't want to see them embarrassed. You want to see them hurt. You don't want to see them shamed. We have that same obligation to each other, to demonstrate genuine care so we become upright models of a right relationship with God. He goes on in verse 11, and the third aspect of this genuine care, he says this genuine care, it becomes like mutual mentoring. Verse 11, he says, for you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, a father teaching, guiding, mentoring his children. Then verse 12, he says, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. Wow. Okay, so we're talking about how connection stories can become a metric to measure whether or not the church is healthy. Well, we've looked at the idea that first, they're a metric because we get a sense whether or not, well, they're reflecting pure motives. Second, whether or not they're reflecting genuine care in relationships. Finally, they're a metric if they reflect and honor a divine calling. I go back to verse 4. Paul said this, on the contrary, not like those impure, not like those trickery, those manipulative motives. No, on the contrary, we speak as those, and he says this, approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. Wow. There's a divine calling that God gives his brides, his churches. Every individual bride has a calling that they're supposed to fulfill. Every church, a calling to fulfill. We are entrusted with the gospel to have an impact in our Jerusalem, or Judea, or Samaria, to all points of the earth. We are the New Hope Community Church. We meet at 5600 South Biscayne Drive, Northport, Florida, and we are entrusted to have an impact where we are. And when we do, we honor the divine calling. As a church, we're getting ready next week to have our annual meeting. We'll talk about goals and visions as we move forward. I'll share the third metric that I see in this letter to the Thessalonian church. But I want to submit to you that as we move forward, as your pastor, I will be one of those individuals that measures our success by the participation stories and the connection stories I'm hearing. I hope indeed they abound in our midst. Pastor Bruce Resengata, New Hope Community Church, we meet at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Join us if you can, 5600 South Biscayne Drive. Nueva Esperanza meets at 1:30 in the afternoon. Celebrate Recovery meets on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. We just want to encourage you to connect, because your connection story is a part of what we believe God wants to do. Thanks. Be blessed.